On the night of January 18th, 1986, 13 people perished in a basement fire at an abandoned row house on North Philadelphia's Germantown Avenue. All young, all members of the same gambling crew. The method was arson, deliberate, calculated, and executed with horrifying precision. The perpetrators weren't rival gangs or organized crime families. They were two brothers, Marcus and Tyrell Grant, sanitation workers who'd grown up 4 blocks away from their victims. The Philadelphia Fire Department would later classify it as one of the deadliest incidents of civilian retaliation in the city's history. But the reason behind the Inferno wasn't drugs, wasn't a turf war over territory, wasn't even money from a bad bet. It was a cheap silver charm bracelet worth $25, the only thing the Grant brothers had to remember their sister by, and 13 men who'd laughed when asked to give it back. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. North Philadelphia in January of 1986 was a war zone frozen in time. The neighborhood stretched from Lehigh Avenue South to Girard, from Broad Street West toward the Schuylkill River, roughly 3 square miles home to approximately 60,000 people, most of them African American, most of them struggling. The population density meant you were never truly alone, but somehow everyone felt isolated, trapped in a place where the American dream had packed its bags and moved to the suburbs 3 decades ago, leaving behind only the people who couldn't afford to follow. Winter that year hit Philadelphia with biblical fury. The blizzard that struck in mid-January brought temperatures down to 8 degrees at night, rising to maybe 15 during the day. Snow fell in waves, 6 inches, then 8 more, then another foot on top of that. The wind came off the Delaware River with teeth that bit through every layer of clothing. It was the kind of cold that made your lungs ache when you breathed, that turned exposed skin red and raw in minutes, that killed homeless people sleeping in doorways and old people whose heat got shut off. The smell of North Philly in winter was unmistakable. Burning trash from metal barrels where people tried to stay warm. Exhaust from SEPTA buses grinding through slush-covered streets, grease from takeout spots, fried chicken, cheesesteaks, pizza by the slice that stayed open because people needed hot food when everything else had shut down. And underneath it all, that particular scent of poverty in winter, mildew from poorly heated apartments, dampness that settled into everything, the chemical tang of space heaters pushed beyond their limits. At night, you could hear the city suffering, wind rattling loose window frames in abandoned buildings, the scrape of snow shovels on concrete at 3 a.m. when people cleared sidewalks before work. Sirens, always sirens, sometimes so frequent they became white noise. The crack and pop of frozen pipes bursting in walls, and occasionally, if you listened close, the sound of dice hitting concrete in basements, where men gathered to gamble because there wasn't much else to do and because money changed hands faster in the dark. But 1986 wasn't just another brutal Philadelphia winter. The city was hemorrhaging population, down to 1.6 million from its peak of 2 million in 1950. Whole blocks in North Philadelphia sat abandoned. Row houses with windows bricked up or boarded over. Factories that had employed thousands now sat empty, their parking lots returning to weeds and broken glass. The drug trade was evolving from heroin to crack cocaine, bringing with it a violence that made the old street corner crews look civilized by comparison. In this environment, respect was survival. Your reputation protected you when the law couldn't, which was most of the time. You could lose your money, you could lose your home, you could even lose your freedom and still come back. But if you lost your respect on the streets of North Philadelphia, you lost everything. Because once people thought you were soft, once they believed you wouldn't respond to disrespect, you became prey. Marcus Alexander Grant understood this code better than most. Marcus was 34 years old that January, though the streets had aged him beyond his years. He stood 6 feet even with the kind of lean, efficient build that came from years of manual labor rather than gym time. His most distinctive feature was a scar that ran from his left ear down to his jaw, a souvenir from a bottle fight when he was 17. The scar gave him a permanent look of menace, like he was always on the edge of violence, which wasn't far from the truth. Every morning, Marcus woke at 4:45 a.m. in the basement apartment he rented on Master Street, 3 blocks south of Lehigh Avenue. The apartment was small, just a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchenette, but it was his. He'd make instant coffee Folgers, never the cheap stuff, and smoke 2 Newport cigarettes on the back steps before heading to his job with the Philadelphia Streets Department. Sanitation worker, garbage man. The job paid $8.50 an hour, enough to cover rent and keep food on the table if he was careful. Marcus had worked sanitation for 11 years, ever since he got out of Graterford Prison in 1975, after serving 3 years for aggravated assault. The job was hard, lifting cans in all weather, breathing exhaust and rot, dealing with people's trash and their contempt. But it was steady work, and for a man with a record, steady work was everything. His supervisor, a white guy named Tom Kowalski, who'd grown up in Kensington, paid Marcus under the table when he needed extra shifts. Never asked questions about where he'd been or what he'd done, just gave him work and expected it done right. Marcus lived alone, never married, no kids that he claimed. His mother had died from complications of diabetes in 1979. His father, Raymond Grant, had been killed in a bar fight in August of 1968, stabbed 7 times over a gambling debt he'd refused to pay. Marcus had been 16 years old when he watched his father bleed out on the floor of a Girard Avenue taproom while people stepped over the body to finish their drinks. What Marcus valued most, more than money, more than reputation on the streets, was family. Specifically, his younger brother Tyrell and the memory of their sister, Keisha. Tyrell Marcus Grant was 28 years old, stood 5'11" with a stocky, powerful build, from years of lifting and moving furniture for a delivery company. Where Marcus was cold and calculating, Tyrell was emotional, reactive, the kind of man who felt everything intensely and showed it on his face. He'd dropped out of high school in 10th grade, tried to get his GED twice, but couldn't pass the math section. Worked whatever jobs he could find, delivery, construction, warehouse work, but nothing stuck for long. Tyrell had a girlfriend, Shanice, 24, who worked at a Pathmark grocery store on Broad Street. They had plans, vague dreams about maybe getting married, maybe moving somewhere warmer, anywhere that wasn't North Philadelphia in January. But Tyrell's defining characteristic was his absolute loyalty to his older brother. Marcus had raised him after their mother died, had kept him fed and clothed when there was barely enough for one. When you hurt Marcus, you hurt Tyrell. When you disrespected Marcus, you might as well have spit in Tyrell's face. The brothers weren't particularly close in the day-to-day sense. They didn't talk about feelings or sit around reminiscing, but they understood each other completely. They shared a code that required no discussion. Family protects family. Family avenges family. Family is all you have when everything else fails. And then there was Keisha. Keisha Renee Grant would have been 31 years old in January of 1986, if she'd lived that long. But Keisha had died on November 3rd, 1985, just 10 weeks before the fire, from a heroin overdose in a shooting gallery on Susquehanna Avenue. She was found with a needle still in her arm, slumped against a wall. 29 years old and weighing 93 pounds. The medical examiner ruled it accidental. Too much fentanyl mixed with the heroin. Her heart had simply stopped. Marcus and Tyrell had buried her at Mount Peace Cemetery on a cold Tuesday morning. Marcus paid for everything, the casket, the plot, the headstone that read, Keisha Renee Grant, 1956–1985. Beloved sister, her light still guides us. It took every dollar he'd saved over 2 years. He didn't care. She was family. Keisha had been beautiful once, before the drugs, before the streets claimed her. She'd had dreams, wanted to be a nurse, had actually completed 2 semesters at Community College of Philadelphia before money ran out, and she dropped out. Started cocktail waitressing to pay bills. Started using to deal with the hours and the men and the hopelessness. By the time she was 25, heroin owned her completely. Marcus and Tyrell had tried to help, tried to get her into treatment programs that had waiting lists 6 months long, tried to keep her clean through sheer force of will, but addiction doesn't care about love or family or good intentions. It just takes and takes until there's nothing left. The only thing Keisha had owned at the end, the only possession she hadn't sold or lost or had stolen, was a charm bracelet. Silver, cheaply made, probably cost $25 new, but their mother had given it to Keisha for her 16th birthday in 1972, back when things were still okay, back when they were still a family. The bracelet had 7 charms: a tiny heart, a cross, a butterfly, the letter K, a 4-leaf clover, a star, and a small locket that held a picture of their mother. After Keisha died, Marcus kept the bracelet, wrapped it in tissue paper and kept it in a shoebox under his bed, along with photographs and her death certificate and the program from her funeral. It was all he had left of his sister, all he had left of the family that used to be. On the night of January 4th, 1986, 2 weeks before the fire, Marcus made a mistake that would cost 13 lives. The basement gambling operation on Germantown Avenue near Lehigh wasn't anything official, just an informal dice game that ran most Friday and Saturday nights in an abandoned row house that should have been condemned years ago. The building was a 3-story brick structure, typical North Philly construction from the 1920s, with the first floor boarded up, but the basement accessible through a side entrance that had been pried open. Darius D. Thompson ran the game. Darius was 32 years old, tall and thin, with a gold tooth that caught light when he smiled. He'd grown up in the neighborhood, knew everyone, trusted almost no one. The game was his hustle. He took a percentage of every pot, provided the space, and kept lookout. On a good night, he might clear $200. On a bad night, maybe $50. It wasn't much, but it was his. The crew that gathered most weekends included a rotating cast of local guys. Jerome "Rome" Wilson, 28, who worked at a body shop on Broad Street. Kevin Mitchell, 30, who drove a forklift at a warehouse. Terrence T. Jackson, 26, who claimed to be between jobs, but really just hustled whatever he could. Andre Simmons, 29, who had a daughter and an ex-wife and child support he couldn't pay. These weren't hardened criminals. They were just North Philly guys trying to get through winter with a little extra money, a little distraction, a little hope that their luck might change if they just rolled the right combination. Marcus had known about the game for years but never participated. Gambling wasn't his vice. He'd seen what it did to his father. But on Friday, January 4th, Tyrell convinced him to come along. Just one night, just a few hours, maybe win enough to buy something nice for Shanice's birthday. Marcus wore his heavy winter coat against the 8-degree cold, his work boots crunching through snow that had been there so long it had turned gray with exhaust and dirt. But around his neck, under his coat, he wore something unusual. Keisha's charm bracelet, looped twice around his neck like a necklace. He'd started wearing it after she died, some combination of grief and remembrance and the need to keep her close. Tyrell had told him not to. Man, you gonna get robbed wearing jewelry in the game. But Marcus didn't care. It made him feel like Keisha was still with him. The basement of the abandoned row house was surprisingly warm. Someone had rigged a kerosene heater that glowed orange in the corner. fighting a losing battle against concrete walls that held cold like a grudge. The smell was unmistakable. Cigarette smoke, spilled beer, unwashed bodies, and that particular male musk of desperation and bravado. The only light came from two battery-powered lanterns that cast everything in harsh yellow tones. About 15 men crowded into the space, some playing dice, others watching, everyone drinking cheap liquor from plastic cups. The game was loud, voices overlapping, trash talk and laughter and the rattle of dice on concrete. Marcus played conservatively at first, small bets watching the patterns, learning who was lucky and who was desperate. By midnight, he was up about $40. Not bad for a few hours' work. That's when it happened. Marcus was leaning against the wall, waiting for the next round, when Darius D. Thompson noticed the bracelet hanging around his neck. It had slipped out from under Marcus's coat when he'd bent down to retrieve dropped dice. "Yo, what you wearing there, Marcus?" Dee's voice carried across the basement. "That a woman's bracelet?" The room went quiet. Not silent, the kerosene heater still hissed. Someone's radio still played Frankie Beverly in the background, but quiet enough that everyone could hear. Marcus tucked the bracelet back under his coat. "Family heirloom, my sister's. Mind your business." Dee laughed. Not malicious yet, just amused. Man out here wearing his dead sister's jewelry like some kind of memorial. He said it to get a laugh, and he got one. A few guys chuckled, nothing serious. Marcus should have left then, should have walked out, let it go, understood that in a basement full of drinking men looking for entertainment, he'd become the entertainment. But pride wouldn't let him. The same pride that had sent him to prison at 21 for beating a man nearly to death over disrespect. "You got something to say about my sister?" Marcus's voice dropped to that dangerous register, quiet and cold. Dee raised his hands. "No disrespect, man, I'm just saying." "Then don't say nothing." The moment passed. The game resumed, but something had shifted. Marcus could feel it in the room, a change in energy, a targeting. He'd shown weakness by reacting. In the ecosystem of street respect, weakness was blood in the water. Around 1:30 a.m., Marcus was down to his last $20. He made a bet, lost, made another, lost again. The cold calculation he'd started with had given way to frustration. Tyrell was beside him, quiet but tense, sensing his brother's mood darkening. At 1:47 a.m., Marcus made one final bet, his last $20 on a roll. If he won, he'd walk out even. If he lost, he was done. He lost. Marcus stood up to leave. That's when Jerome Wilson, drunk and feeling bold, made his move. He reached out, grabbed the bracelet hanging around Marcus's neck, yanked hard enough to break the cheap silver chain. "Yo, I won this fair and square," Rome said, holding the bracelet up. "Man brought jewelry to a dice game. That's on him." Marcus lunged, caught Rome with a straight right hand that dropped him to the concrete. But before Marcus could do more damage, 4 men grabbed him: Dee, Kevin Mitchell, Terrence Jackson, and Andre Simmons. They wrestled him against the wall while Rome stood up, nose bleeding, holding the bracelet. "Give it back," Marcus said. His voice was eerily calm despite 4 men holding him. "That's my sister's. Give it back now." Rome looked at the bracelet, looked at Marcus, made a decision he'd regret for the 10 weeks he had left to live. "Nah, I think I'll keep it. Cheap-ass jewelry probably ain't worth nothing anyway. But it's the principle. You came at me, so I'm taking what's mine." "It's worth $25 maybe," Dee said, examining it. "Silver-plated, not real silver. You really fighting over this?" Marcus stopped struggling. The men holding him felt the change, from active resistance to something colder. When he spoke, his voice was completely flat. "I'm asking one more time. Give me my sister's bracelet." "Or what?" Rome was emboldened by his crew backing him. "You gonna cry about it? Gonna call the cops?" Man, get out of here with that sentimental bullshit. Tyrell tried to intervene. Look, man, that belonged to our sister who just died. Just give it back. We'll walk away, no problems. Rome laughed. Actually laughed. Your sister who OD'd like a junkie? Man, she probably stole this bracelet from somebody else. Junkies don't own nothing. They just borrow it until they can sell it. The men holding Marcus felt him go completely still. Not relaxed, still. The way a predator goes motionless before it strikes. Let him go, Dee said quietly. He'd known Marcus longer than the others, knew his history. Just give him the bracelet and let's be done. But Rome was drunk and stupid and feeling tough with backup. Fuck that, he swung on me, I'm keeping it. They released Marcus. He stood there for a long moment, looking at Rome, at the bracelet, nay, his hand, at the 13 men in the basement who'd just witnessed his humiliation. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, Tyrell following. At the stairs, Marcus stopped, turned back, looked at each face in the basement, memorizing them. 13 men, 13 witnesses to disrespect he couldn't let stand. I'll be seeing you, Marcus said quietly. Rome laughed. Looking forward to it, jewelry boy. Marcus and Tyrell climbed the stairs into the January night. The temperature had dropped to 6 degrees. The wind cut through their coats like they weren't there. They walked in silence for 3 blocks before Tyrell finally spoke. We going to the police? Marcus looked at his brother like he'd suggested flying to the moon. The police? For what? So they can laugh at us too? So they can tell us it's a civil matter? This is North Philly, Tyrell. We handle our own. Then what we gonna do? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, breath visible in the frozen air, footsteps crunching on ice-packed sidewalk. We're going to teach them what it costs to take what ain't theirs. We're going to make sure they never forget what happens when you disrespect the Grant family. How? Marcus didn't answer, but Tyrell saw something in his brother's eyes that made him understand this wasn't over. This was just beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus became someone different, not visibly. He still went to work every morning, still did his job, still came home and ate dinner and went to bed. But inside, where it counted, Marcus Grant was transforming from a working man into something else entirely. He researched, asked careful questions of people who knew about such things, where to buy chains that wouldn't break under pressure, what kind of locks couldn't be picked quickly, how fires spread in enclosed spaces, what accelerants burned hottest and fastest. On Tuesday, January 7th, Marcus drove to a hardware store in Roxborough, far enough from his neighborhood that nobody would recognize him. He bought 3 industrial chains, the kind used to secure motorcycles or close commercial gates. Each chain was 8 feet long, thick links that would take bolt cutters to break. $47 for all 3. Paid cash. At a second hardware store in Manayunk, he bought 4 padlocks, heavy-duty brass cylinders with hardened steel shackles, the kind that promised on the package they were virtually impossible to pick or break. $34. On Thursday, January 9th, Marcus visited 5 different gas stations across North Philadelphia, never buying more than 1 5-gallon container of kerosene at each location. 25 gallons total, $212, nearly a week's pay. He stored everything in a storage unit he rented under a fake name in Kensington, paid 3 months in advance, cash, no questions asked. While Marcus planned his careful choreography of violence, Tyrell struggled with what was coming. He knew his brother well enough to understand that Marcus wasn't making empty threats. Whatever was going to happen would be final, irreversible, the kind of thing that changed you forever. On Sunday, January 12th, Shanice confronted Tyrell in their apartment above a Chinese takeout on Allegheny Avenue. "Where you been going every night?" she asked. Her eyes were red from crying. "And don't lie to me, Tyrell. I know when you're lying." Tyrell sat on their second-hand couch, head in his hands. The apartment was small, but they'd made it home. Posters on the walls, dishes in the sink, a life they'd built together. Just helping Marcus with something. With what? What could Marcus need help with at midnight that's got you acting like you're already in prison? Tyrell looked up at her. Shanice was beautiful, always had been, with her hair pulled back and her work uniform still on from the grocery store. She deserved better than this, better than him, better than whatever was coming. Some guys disrespected him, Tyrell said carefully. Took something that belonged to our sister. We're getting it back. Getting it back how? Tyrell didn't answer. Shanice sat down next to him, took his hand. Whatever Marcus is planning, you don't have to be part of it. You always talking about getting out of North Philly, about moving somewhere better. This ain't the way, baby. This is the way you stay trapped here forever. He knew she was right. Knew it in every part of him that was still rational, still capable of seeing consequences beyond immediate revenge. But there was another part, louder, more insistent, that remembered Keisha's funeral, that remembered watching his sister waste away from addiction while he could do nothing to save her, that remembered the only thing she'd left behind was now in the hands of a man who'd called her a junkie. I can't let Marcus do this alone, Tyrell said quietly. He's my brother. Shanice pulled her hand away. Then I guess you made your choice. She didn't leave, had nowhere to go, but something broke between them that night, some trust that might never be repaired. On Wednesday, January 15th, 3 days before the fire, Marcus took Tyrell to visit Keisha's grave at Mount Peace Cemetery. They brought flowers, yellow roses, Keisha's favorite, and stood in the bitter cold, looking at the headstone that Marcus had bankrupted himself to buy. You think she'd want this? Tyrell asked quietly. You think Keisha would want us to burn people alive over a $25 bracelet? Marcus was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no emotion at all. Keisha was an addict, died with a needle in her arm in a place that didn't even know her name. The bracelet was all she had left, all we have left of her, and they took it, laughed about it, called her a junkie like she was nothing. She was an addict, Marcus, that's just... Don't. Marcus's voice went cold. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Keisha was our sister before she was anything else. She was family, and family. He stopped, looked at the headstone. Family is all we got. You let someone disrespect family, you got nothing left. Tyrell stood there in the January cold, looking at his sister's grave, feeling the weight of what was coming settle over him like snow that wouldn't melt. When? Tyrell asked. Saturday night. They'll all be there, same as always. You sure about this? Marcus looked at his brother, really looked at him. Tyrell was 28, but looked younger, still had that softness in his face that hard living hadn't erased yet. He had Shanice who loved him, had a job, had a chance, slim but real, at something better than this neighborhood, this life, this cycle. You don't have to be there, Marcus said. I can do this alone. That ain't what I asked. I asked if you're sure. Marcus thought about Keisha at 16, beautiful and full of dreams, wearing the bracelet their mother had given her. Thought about Keisha at 29, 93 pounds and dying in a shooting gallery. Thought about Jerome "Rome" Wilson holding up that bracelet like a trophy while 13 men laughed. I'm sure, Marcus said. They left the cemetery as snow began to fall again. By the time they reached Marcus's car, their footprints were already disappearing under fresh white powder, like they'd never been there at all. Saturday, January 18th, 1986. The day started like any other brutal Philadelphia winter morning. Marcus woke at 4:45 a.m., made his instant coffee, smoked his 2 Newports on the back steps, even though the temperature was 11 degrees and the wind made it feel like 0. He went through his normal routine with mechanical precision: shower, dress, eat a piece of toast standing at the counter. But his mind was somewhere else entirely, running through the plan he'd refined over 2 weeks. At 6:30 a.m., he called in sick to work. First time in 11 years. His supervisor, Tom Kowalski, sounded concerned. "You okay, Marcus? You sound different." "Just the flu, Tom. Be back Monday." He wouldn't be back Monday. Wouldn't be back ever. But Tom didn't need to know that yet. Marcus spent the morning cleaning his apartment. Not normal cleaning, deep cleaning. Washing every surface, scrubbing floors, wiping down walls. Removing every trace of himself from the space. He packed a single bag with clothes and the shoebox that contained Keisha's photographs, her death certificate, the funeral program, everything else he left. At noon, he drove to the storage unit in Kensington. The industrial chains rattled in the trunk as he drove. The padlocks clinked together in a plastic bag. The 5 red containers of kerosene sat in the back seat. 25 gallons of death waiting to be deployed. Tyrell met him at the storage unit at 12:30 p.m. His younger brother looked like he hadn't slept in days. Eyes red, face drawn, hands shaking slightly as he lit a cigarette. "Shanice left this morning," Tyrell said without preamble. "Took her stuff. Said she can't watch me destroy myself. Said when I'm ready to choose her over this, I know where to find her." Marcus felt a pang of guilt, the first real emotion he'd felt in 2 weeks. "You can still walk away. Go after her. I meant it when I said I can do this alone." Tyrell took a long drag on his cigarette. "We both know that's not true. You need someone watching your back, and I need—" He stopped, started over. "Keisha was my sister too. What they did, what they said about her, I can't let that stand either." The brothers loaded the supplies into Marcus's 1979 Buick LeSabre. The car was old, transmission slipping, but it ran. That's all that mattered. They'd abandon it after tonight anyway. At 3:00 p.m., they drove past the abandoned row house on Germantown Avenue. The building looked exactly as it had 2 weeks ago. Boarded windows, crumbling brick, side entrance slightly ajar. Marcus noted the layout carefully. 2 exits, the side door they used to enter the basement, and a back exit that led to an alley behind the building. Both doors opened outward. Old Philadelphia fire code. The basement windows were at ground level, but they'd been covered with plywood and secured from inside with 2x4s. Anyone trying to escape through them would need tools and time. Time they wouldn't have. Marcus parked 3 blocks away. He and Tyrell sat in the car as afternoon faded to evening, as the temperature dropped from 15 degrees to 8. Neither brother spoke much. What was there to say? They'd made their decision. Everything that followed was just execution. At 6:00 p.m., they got dinner at a Chinese takeout on Broad Street. Marcus ate methodically, tasting nothing. Tyrell barely touched his food. An old woman at the next table looked at them with concern. 2 brothers, one clearly older and harder, one younger and frightened, both with the look of men about to do something irreversible. "You boys okay?" she asked. Marcus smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Just a long day." She didn't look convinced, but nodded and went back to her soup. They'd be on the news by tomorrow. She'd remember them. Would tell police about 2 brothers who looked like they were going to war. At 9:30 p.m., Marcus drove back to the storage unit. They transferred the kerosene containers to the trunk, placed the chains and padlocks in a duffel bag. Marcus checked his watch. 9:47 p.m. The game usually started around 10:30, would be in full swing by midnight. He wanted to wait until everyone was there, until all 13 were accounted for, while Marcus and Tyrell prepared for mass murder 3 miles away on Germantown Avenue. Darius D. Thompson was setting up for the weekly game. He'd arrived at the abandoned row house at 9 p.m., descended the concrete stairs to the basement, fired up the kerosene heater that would fight its losing battle against the cold. D was in a good mood. He'd won $200 playing numbers earlier in the week. His daughter's birthday was coming up and he had money to buy her something nice. At 32, he was thinking about getting out of the hustle, maybe getting a real job, trying to rebuild his relationship with his daughter's mother. He had no idea he had 4 hours to live. Rome Wilson arrived at 10:15 p.m., still wearing the charm bracelet around his wrist like a trophy. He'd meant to pawn it but kept forgetting, and now it had become a joke among the crew. Marcus's sister's jewelry, they called it, a reminder of the night they'd punked a man who thought he was too tough to be punked. Kevin Mitchell showed up at 10:30 with a bottle of cheap vodka. Terrence T. Jackson arrived at 10:45 with his cousin Wayne. Andre Simmons came at 11 complaining about child support and his ex-wife. By 11:30, 13 men crowded into the basement, some regulars, some new faces, all of them there for the same reason: to gamble, to drink, to forget for a few hours that it was January in North Philadelphia, and their lives weren't going anywhere. None of them noticed the 1979 Buick LeSabre that parked on a side street 3 blocks away at 11:42 p.m. None of them saw 2 brothers climb out, move through the darkness like shadows carrying chains and locks, and death in red plastic containers. 11:47 p.m., January 18th, 1986. Temperature had dropped to 6 degrees. The wind had died to almost nothing, leaving the night still and brittle and cold, enough to freeze spit before it hit the ground. The streets of North Philadelphia were mostly empty. Anyone with sense was inside, huddled around heaters trying to stay warm. Marcus Grant stood in the alley behind the abandoned row house, hands in the pockets of his heavy winter coat. He could hear music and voices drifting up from the basement vent. Curtis Mayfield's Pusherman playing on someone's boombox. Men laughing, the rattle of dice on concrete. Normal sounds, the last normal sounds some of them would ever hear. Tyrell was positioned at the side entrance, the main door everyone used to access the basement. He held one of the industrial chains in his gloved hands, heavy links that would wrap twice around the door handle, and the iron railing bolted into the brick. His breath came out in white clouds. His hands were steady now. The decision made, the doubt gone, replaced by cold determination. Marcus checked his watch. 11:51 p.m. He pulled out the small notebook where he'd written the names. 13 of them. He'd verified the count by watching from across the street for the past hour, counting heads as they arrived. Darius D. Thompson, 32, Jerome Rome Wilson, 28, Kevin Mitchell, 30, Terrence T. Jackson, 26, Wayne Jackson, 24, T's cousin, Andre Simmons, 29, Marcus Riley, 31, Dante Brown, 27, Jamal Washington, 25, Chris Taylor, 29, Deshaun Harris, 26, Mike Johnson, 30, Rashid Coleman, 28, 13 men. Some he knew by name, some just by face. All of them there that night 2 weeks ago. All of them witnesses to his humiliation. All of them about to pay a price so far beyond what they'd taken that the scales would never balance. At 11:53 p.m., Marcus walked to the basement's rear exit. The door was metal, painted green decades ago, but now mostly rust. It opened outward into the alley, fire code from the 1920s designed to let people escape quickly in an emergency. Marcus tested it gently. Unlocked. Like he'd expected, nobody worried about security in an abandoned building. He wrapped the first chain through the door handle and around a concrete support post that had been part of the building's original foundation. Wrapped it twice, pulled it tight. The chain rattled slightly. Marcus froze, listening. The music continued, nobody had heard. He secured the chain with a padlock. The kind the package promised was virtually impossible to pick or break. Tested it. The door moved maybe 2 inches inward, no more. Not enough for a man to squeeze through. Not enough to escape what was coming. Marcus pulled out a small walkie-talkie, the kind you could buy at Radio Shack for $20. Keyed the mic. Side door, now. 3 blocks away, in the LeSabre's front seat, Tyrell heard the transmission. He climbed out of the car, carrying his chain and 2 padlocks. Moved quickly through the January night, breath visible, boots crunching on ice. At the side entrance, he could hear voices clearly now. Someone was complaining about a bad roll. Someone else was talking about the Eagles, about whether they'd make the playoffs. Normal conversation. Life continuing, unaware that death had arrived. Tyrell wrapped his chain through the door handle and around the iron railing. The railing was old but solid, bolted into brick with hardware that had been there since the 1920s. He pulled the chain tight, secured it with both padlocks, one on each end. Redundancy, insurance. He tested it. The door opened maybe 1.5 inches. Might as well have been welded shut. Tyrell keyed his walkie-talkie. Done. Get the fuel. Move quiet. They'd left the 5 kerosene containers in the alley, hidden behind a dumpster. Marcus and Tyrell each grabbed 2. Tyrell took the 5th. 25 gallons of accelerant. More than enough. The building's ventilation system was ancient, just concrete vents at ground level that allowed air circulation to the basement. There were 3 of them, each about 2 feet square, covered with rusted metal grills that pulled off with minimal effort. At 11:58 p.m., Marcus removed the first grill. Sound poured out. Louder now, music and laughter and the distinctive sound of money-changing hands. He could see movement through the vent. Shadows of men illuminated by the kerosene heater's orange glow and the battery-powered lanterns. Marcus unscrewed the cap on his first container. The smell of kerosene was immediate, sharp and chemical and unmistakable. He tilted the container, began to pour. The kerosene splashed into the basement, hitting the concrete floor with a sound like heavy rain. 5 gallons disappearing into the darkness. Marcus moved to the second vent, repeated the process. Another 5 gallons. Inside the basement, someone noticed. Yo, what's that smell? Smell like gasoline. Nah, that's kerosene, like from a heater. Where's it coming from? At the third vent, Tyrell poured his containers. 10 more gallons joining the 15 Marcus had already dumped. The basement floor was concrete, but kerosene doesn't need absorbent material. It spreads, pools, finds cracks, and low spots. Creates a lake of potential energy waiting for ignition. Marcus checked his watch. 12:02 a.m., January 19th, 1986, Sunday morning, the Lord's Day. He felt no irony. He pulled out a book of matches, the kind you get free at restaurants and bars. These were from a Chinese place on Ridge Avenue. On the cover, a red dragon and the words, "Golden Palace, we deliver." Inside the basement, someone tried the side door. Found it would only open 1 inch. Yo, door's stuck. Check the back. Footsteps running, the back door rattling, opening 1 inch. No more. This one too. What the fuck? Panic was setting in now, fast, primal. The smell of kerosene was overwhelming, and 13 men who'd grown up in North Philadelphia knew exactly what that meant. Marcus struck the match. The flame was tiny at first, dancing in the cold air. He held it for 3 seconds, watching it burn down toward his gloved fingers. "This is for Keisha," he said quietly. He dropped the match into the first vent. 12:03 a.m., January 19th, 1986. The kerosene ignited with a sound like the world inhaling, not an explosion. Kerosene doesn't explode, it just burns, hot and fast and relentless. But the sound of it catching, of all that potential energy transforming into heat and light and death, was like nothing Marcus had ever heard. The orange glow from the basement vents intensified instantly, going from the soft flicker of lanterns and a heater to a violent, pulsing brightness that lit up the alley like daylight. The screaming started immediately. Inside the basement, the kerosene hadn't just pooled on the floor. It had spread across 25 feet of concrete, soaked into cracks, splashed against the walls. When it ignited, everything ignited at once. The temperature went from maybe 60 degrees to over 1,000 in seconds. Marcus stood at the vent, watching. He'd expected to feel something, satisfaction maybe, or horror at what he'd done. Instead, he felt nothing. The void inside him had become absolute. Tyrell wasn't so fortunate. He stood at the second vent, frozen, listening to the screams. Men calling for help, men crying, men praying, men cursing, men dying. "Oh God," Tyrell whispered. "Oh Jesus Christ, what did we do?" Someone tried the side door again. Marcus could hear it from 40 feet away, the chain rattling, the door straining against the locks. But the chain held. The locks held. The door opened its inch and a half. No more. A face appeared in the gap. Darius D. Thompson. Marcus recognized him, even in the orange firelight. D's face was already blistered from heat, his eyes wide with terror and understanding. "Marcus!" D's voice was raw, barely human. "Marcus, please, let us out. We're burning, please." Marcus walked slowly to the side door, looked through the gap at the man who'd run the game, who'd laughed when Rome took the bracelet, who'd done nothing when Marcus asked for it back. "You took what was mine," Marcus said quietly. His voice was completely flat. "You disrespected my sister's memory. Now you pay. It was just a bracelet, just a cheap fucking bracelet. It was all I had left of her." Dee's face was melting, literally melting. The heat inside the basement had to be over 1,200 degrees now. The fat under Dee's skin was liquefying, his features distorting. "My daughter," Dee gasped. "She's 6 years old. She needs her father, please." Marcus thought of Keisha at 6, before the drugs, before the streets, when she still smiled and played and believed the world was good. "You should have thought of her before," Marcus said. He turned away from the door, walked back toward the alley. Behind him, Dee's screams intensified, then suddenly stopped. At the rear exit, someone had found something to batter the door with. Maybe a piece of furniture, maybe a support beam. Marcus could hear the impacts, metal on metal. The door shuddered but held. The chain held. Through the vent, Marcus could see the basement interior now. The fire had spread to everything. The wooden furniture they'd been using for the game, the old 2x4s covering the windows, someone's coat. The kerosene heater that had been providing warmth had become another accelerant, its fuel adding to the inferno. Bodies were visible, some still moving, trying to crawl toward exits that wouldn't open, some already still. The smoke was thick, black, poisonous, filled with burning plastic and treated wood and God knew what else. At 12:07 a.m., someone made it to one of the plywood-covered windows, started kicking at it from inside. The plywood was secured with 2x4s and nails, but desperation gives strength. After 5 kicks, 6, 7, the plywood started to crack. Marcus watched this with detached interest. Would someone escape? Would his plan fail after all? On the 8th kick, the plywood splintered. An arm came through, Rome Wilson's arm. Marcus recognized the charm bracelet, still dangling from the wrist. Rome's face appeared in the gap. He was screaming, though no sound came out anymore. His lungs were too damaged from smoke and heat. But Marcus could read his lips. "Help me, please, help." Marcus walked to the window. Rome's eyes found his in the firelight. Understanding passed between them. Recognition, knowledge of who'd done this and why. "The bracelet," Marcus said. Rome looked at his wrist, at the cheap silver chain with 7 charms. His hand was already blistering, the skin blackening. With his other hand, the one still inside the burning basement, he fumbled with the clasp. It took him 20 seconds. 20 seconds of agony, fingers that didn't work right anymore, metal that was hot enough to burn even through the burns. But finally, the clasp released. Rome held the bracelet through the gap, his hand shaking, skin sloughing off. "Please," Rome whispered. The word came out as a wheeze, barely audible. Marcus took the bracelet, held it up to the firelight. All 7 charms were still there. The heart, the cross, the butterfly, the letter K, the 4-leaf clover, the star, the locket, slightly tarnished from 2 weeks in Rome's possession, but intact. "Thank you," Marcus said. He walked away. Rome's screaming started again, raw and animal. He was trying to pull himself through the window, but the gap was too small, the plywood around it still partially intact. He got his head and one arm through, but his shoulders were too wide. He was stuck, half in and half out, while the fire consumed him from behind. At 12:11 a.m., Rome stopped screaming. Tyrell had backed away from the vents. Couldn't watch anymore, couldn't listen. He sat on the frozen ground in the alley, back against a brick wall, hands over his ears like a child trying to block out thunder. Marcus stood over him. "We need to go. Fire department will be here soon." "I can hear them," Tyrell said. His voice was hollow. "They're still screaming. Some of them are still alive." "Not for long. Come on." "Oh God, oh Jesus, what did we do, Marcus? What the fuck did we do?" Marcus grabbed his brother's arm, pulled him to his feet. "We did what had to be done. We protected our sister's memory. We showed them there are consequences. Now we go." They walked quickly through the alley, heading away from Germantown Avenue. Behind them, the orange glow was visible for blocks now. Smoke poured from the vents, thick and black and carrying the smell of burning flesh. At 12:14 a.m., someone called 911. A woman living 3 houses down had woken to the smell of smoke, looked out her window, saw the glow. Fire department response time in North Philadelphia averaged 7 minutes. But it was Saturday night turning into Sunday morning. Resources were stretched, and this was an abandoned building in a neighborhood nobody cared about. Engine Company 60 arrived at 12:23 a.m., 9 minutes after the call. By then, anyone still alive inside the basement was already dead or dying. The fire had been burning for 20 minutes. The temperature inside the basement was estimated at over 1,500 degrees. Firefighter Thomas O'Brien was first through the side door after they cut the chains with bolt cutters. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. Bodies piled against the door like they'd been trying to claw their way out. Burned beyond recognition, fused together by melted clothing and flesh. The smell was indescribable, a mixture of burned meat, chemicals, and something else that O'Brien's brain refused to categorize as human. He backed out, walked 20 feet away, vomited onto the frozen sidewalk. By 12:45 a.m., the fire was under control. By 1 a.m., the medical examiner was on scene. By 1:30 a.m., they'd done a preliminary count, 13 bodies, all in the basement, all burned beyond immediate identification. Dental records would be needed, possibly DNA. Detective Raymond Walsh arrived at 2 a.m. He was 43 years old, 21 years with the Philadelphia Police Department, currently assigned to homicide. He'd seen plenty of bodies, shootings, stabbings, beatings, but he'd never seen anything like this. The scene told a story. The chains on both exits cut by firefighters but clearly placed from outside. The padlocks high quality, deliberate. The accelerant pattern visible on the walls and floor. Kerosene based on the smell. The ventilation grills removed and left on the ground beside the vents. This wasn't an accident. This was execution. Walsh walked the perimeter, noting everything. At the rear window where Rome had tried to escape, he found the splintered plywood. And on the frozen ground beneath the window, A single charm from a bracelet. The letter K must have fallen off when the bracelet was removed. He bagged it as evidence, not knowing yet what it meant. By 3 a.m., Walsh had interviewed witnesses. The woman who called 911 said she'd heard screaming around midnight, but thought it was just people being loud. Didn't realize it was people dying. A man who lived across the street said he'd seen two figures in the alley around 11:45 p.m. Two brothers, maybe, one taller, one shorter, both wearing dark coats, walked like they had purpose. Another witness, a homeless man who'd been sleeping in a doorway 2 blocks away, said he'd seen two men carrying red containers toward Germantown Avenue around 11:30. Looked like gas cans. Thought maybe they ran out of fuel and were bringing some for their car. At 4 a.m., while Detective Walsh coordinated the investigation of 13 bodies in an abandoned basement, Marcus and Tyrell Grant sat in their childhood bedroom at their deceased mother's row house on Master Street. The house had been empty since she died, slowly decaying, but they still had keys. They'd gone there after abandoning the Buick in Kensington, leaving it unlocked with the keys in the ignition. Someone would steal it by morning. By the time police found it, if they found it, there'd be no physical evidence linking it to the fire. Marcus sat on his old bed, the one he'd slept in from age 6 to 18. He held Keisha's bracelet in his hands, turning it over, examining each charm in the dim light. From a street lamp outside, the heart for love, the cross for faith, the butterfly for transformation, the letter K, except that one was missing, fallen somewhere, the 4-leaf clover for luck that had run out, the star for dreams that died, the locket for the mother who'd given this gift. 6 charms left, close enough. Tyrell sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled to his chest. He was crying silently, shoulders shaking. "They're dead," Tyrell said, "all of them. We killed 13 people, Marcus. 13. 12, Marcus corrected. Rome made 13, but he deserved it most. That makes it okay? That makes us not murderers?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no emotion. "We're murderers. I know that. You know that. But they took Keisha's bracelet. They laughed about it. They called her a junkie, like she wasn't a person, like she didn't matter. I couldn't let that stand. So we burned them alive." "Yes. Children are going to grow up without fathers, Marcus. Mothers are going to bury their sons. We did that. For a $25 bracelet." "It wasn't about the bracelet," Marcus said quietly. "It was about respect, about showing the world that the Grant family doesn't let people take what's ours, about making sure nobody ever forgets what it costs to disrespect us." Tyrell looked at his brother, really looked at him, saw a man who'd crossed a line so far that he couldn't even see it in the rearview mirror anymore. "Was it worth it?" Tyrell asked. Marcus held up the bracelet, 6 charms catching the light, all that remained of his sister, all that remained of his soul. "Ask me in 20 years, Marcus said. By Sunday afternoon, the news had spread through North Philadelphia, like the fire itself. 13 dead, doors chained from outside, kerosene poured through vents, the most deliberate, most calculated act of mass murder in the city's recent history. At Greater Bethlehem Baptist Church on Lehigh Avenue, Pastor David Johnson struggled through Sunday service. The church was packed. More people than he'd seen in years, all seeking answers he couldn't provide. "We ask why," Pastor Johnson said, his voice breaking. "Why this violence? Why this hatred? How does a dispute over property escalate to 13 lives lost?" He had no answers, just grief and the terrible knowledge that his congregation included families of the victims. By Monday morning, Detective Walsh had established patterns. The chains were purchased from 2 different hardware stores in neighborhoods far from North Philly. Security camera footage showed a man matching Marcus Grant's description buying chains on January 7th. padlocks on January 8th. The kerosene was harder to trace, purchased in small quantities from 5 different gas stations. But a clerk at one station on Broad Street remembered a man who'd bought a 5-gallon container on January 9th. Tall guy, scar on his face, paid cash, seemed nervous. The description matched Marcus Grant, but it was Darius D. Thompson's mother who provided the crucial lead. On Sunday afternoon, devastated by her son's death, she told police about the dice game, about the argument 2 weeks ago, about a man named Marcus who'd had his sister's bracelet taken by Rome Wilson. "Dee told me about it," she said through tears. "Thought it was funny. Said this guy Marcus got all emotional over cheap jewelry. Said the guy threatened them, but nobody took it serious. Just figured he was talking tough." Walsh pulled Marcus Grant's file. Aggravated assault conviction, served 3 years at Graterford. Released in 1975. Clean since then, no arrests, no incidents. Worked sanitation for the city. Had a younger brother, Tyrell, also clean record. Had a sister who died of an overdose in November. Keisha Renee Grant, 1956-1985. The pieces came together fast. On Monday, January 20th at 6 a.m., 8 officers approached the basement apartment on Master Street, where Marcus Grant was registered as residing. They came prepared for a firefight. Body armor, weapons drawn, backup units staged 2 blocks away. What they found was an empty apartment, cleaned out completely. No furniture, no personal items, nothing but walls and floors and the ghost of someone who'd already disappeared. At the deceased mother's house on Master Street, they found Marcus and Tyrell Grant sitting on the front steps at 6:15 a.m., unarmed, hands visible, waiting. Detective Walsh got out of his vehicle slowly, walked up the cracked concrete path. Marcus stood to meet him. "Marcus Grant?" "That's me." "I'm Detective Walsh, Philadelphia Police. I need you and your brother to come with us. We have some questions about a fire on Saturday night." "I know what this is about," Marcus said calmly. "We'll come quietly. No need for the guns." Walsh studied him. This was a man who'd burned 13 people alive 40 hours ago. Should be running, hiding, panicking. Instead, he stood there with eerie calm, like he'd been expecting this exact moment. "You're under arrest for 13 counts of murder, arson, and—" "I know the charges," Marcus interrupted. "Can I ask one thing before we go?" Walsh hesitated. "Depends." Marcus reached into his coat pocket slowly. 3 officers tensed, hands on weapons. He pulled out a charm bracelet, held it up. "Can you make sure this gets returned to my sister? She's buried at Mount Peace Cemetery, Section J, Plot 47. I'd like it buried with her." Walsh took the bracelet, looked at the 6 charms, evidence of motive, evidence of everything. "We'll see," Walsh said. They cuffed Marcus and Tyrell, led them to separate cars. As they drove away from Master Street, Marcus looked back at his mother's house one last time. The place where he'd grown up, where Keisha had grown up, where their father came home drunk and their mother worked 2 jobs, and they'd all believed, somehow, that things would get better. That house had raised 3 children. Now 1 was dead. 2 were going to prison for the rest of their lives. The Grant family line was over. At the police station, Marcus and Tyrell were separated. Walsh took Marcus into interview room 3, turned on the recorder. "Marcus Grant, you're being questioned about the deaths of 13 people in a fire at an abandoned building on Germantown Avenue on the morning of January 19th, 1986. You have the right to remain silent." "I waive my rights," Marcus said. "I'll tell you everything. No point lying about it now." Walsh sat back. In 21 years of police work, he'd never had someone confess to mass murder so readily. "Why?" Walsh asked. "They took my sister's bracelet, disrespected her memory. I asked for it back. They laughed." "So you burned them alive?" "Yes. Do you understand what you're saying? You're confessing to 13 murders. I understand perfectly. I killed 13 men, chained the doors, poured kerosene through the vents, lit it on fire, watched them burn. I did it deliberately. I did it for Keisha. Walsh leaned forward. Marcus, your sister was an addict who died from an overdose. That bracelet was worth maybe $25. You killed 13 people over it, 13 fathers, brothers, sons. You destroyed 13 families. They destroyed my family first, Marcus said quietly. When they took that bracelet, they took the last piece of Keisha I had. They laughed about it, called her a junkie, made me walk away looking weak. I couldn't let that stand. So you committed mass murder. I protected my family's honor. Walsh sat there looking at this man who could rationalize 13 deaths so completely, who showed no remorse, no horror at what he'd done. Where's your brother in all this? Leave Tyrell out of it. He tried to stop me. I forced him to help. He's innocent. Walsh knew that was a lie. Witnesses had seen 2 men, but he appreciated the attempt at protection. Marcus, I've been doing this job 21 years. I've seen murders over drugs, money, women, territory, but I've never seen someone kill 13 people over a bracelet worth $25. It wasn't about the money, Marcus said. It was about respect, about not letting people think they can take what's yours and walk away laughing, about showing the world that the Grant family matters, that Keisha mattered. 13 people are dead, Marcus. 13 families destroyed. How does that balance? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was completely flat. It doesn't. Nothing balances. Nothing makes sense. But they took what was mine, and I took their lives. That's how it works on the streets. You disrespect someone, you pay for it. The trial began in September 1986. It was the biggest case in Philadelphia in years. National news coverage, protesters outside the courthouse, debates about urban violence and the cycle of poverty and the failure of the justice system. The prosecution had everything. Marcus's confession, Tyrell's tearful testimony where he admitted his role but claimed Marcus had forced him to participate, physical evidence linking them to the purchase of chains, locks, and kerosene, witness testimony placing them near the scene. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity. Marcus's sister had just died. He'd snapped, wasn't thinking clearly. But the 2 weeks of planning destroyed that argument. This wasn't temporary insanity. This was calculated revenge. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts for both brothers. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Marcus Alexander Grant, 13 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Tyrell Marcus Grant, 13 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. When the judge read the sentences, Marcus showed no reaction, just nodded slightly, like he'd expected exactly this outcome. Tyrell broke down crying. He was 28 years old, would spend the rest of his life in prison for a crime that took 6 hours but ruined everything forever. The only thing Marcus asked for was Keisha's bracelet, wanted it buried with her like he'd requested. The judge denied the request. The bracelet was evidence, would be stored in a police property room indefinitely. Marcus Grant served 33 years in SCI Graterford, the same prison where he'd done his first stretch for aggravated assault. During that time, he worked in the prison library, taught other inmates to read, led Bible study groups, even though he wasn't particularly religious. Guards said he was one of the most disciplined inmates they'd ever known. Never caused trouble, never complained, never sought attention, just did his time with quiet dignity. He died on March 15, 2019, at 71 years old. Massive heart attack in the prison infirmary. The chaplain reported that Marcus's last coherent words were, "Tell Tyrell I'm sorry. Tell Keisha I got her bracelet back." Whether he truly felt remorse in those final moments or whether he was just trying to make peace with a sister he'd never see again, nobody knows. He was buried in a prison cemetery under a simple marker: Marcus A. Grant, 1948-2019. Tyrell Marcus Grant remains incarcerated at SCI Phoenix. He's 66 now, has been denied parole every time it comes up, most recently in 2024. In prison interviews over the years, he's been consistent. "I helped my brother kill 13 people. I chained those doors. I poured that kerosene. I'm guilty. I deserve to be here. But I think about those men every day, about their families, about the children who grew up without fathers because of what we did. No amount of time can make that right." The victims' families have carried their own weight for nearly 40 years. Darius Thompson's daughter, now 53, has spent her life working with at-risk youth, trying to prevent the kind of violence that killed her father. She's spoken publicly about forgiveness, though she admits she hasn't fully achieved it. Jerome Wilson's mother died in 2003, 57 years old. Friends said she never recovered from losing her son, buried him, and then slowly buried herself in grief and alcohol until her liver gave out. The abandoned row house on Germantown Avenue was demolished in 1987. Today, it's an empty lot with a small memorial, 13 names carved in stone, and the words, "Gone but not forgotten." Every January 19th, family members gather there. They pray, cry, remember. Some have forgiven Marcus Grant, most haven't. All of them carry the scar of that night when 13 men died screaming in a basement because someone took a $25 bracelet. The story became a cautionary tale told across urban America. Don't push desperate men. Don't disrespect people who have nothing left to lose. Don't underestimate what someone will do when you take the last thing that matters to them. But the question that haunted Detective Walsh, the question that haunts everyone who knows this story, is simple and terrible. Was Marcus Grant a mass murderer who killed 13 people in cold blood? Yes. Was he a grieving brother driven to extremes by the theft of his sister's final possession and the mockery of her memory? Also, yes. Both things are true. And that's the most uncomfortable truth of all, because it forces us to ask, what would we do? How far would we go to protect what matters when the world has taken everything else? Where's the line between justified anger and unforgivable violence? Marcus Grant crossed that line, crossed it so far he couldn't even see it anymore. And in doing so, he destroyed not just 13 lives, but 26 families, the victims and his own. Revenge doesn't heal. It doesn't balance the scales. It doesn't bring back the dead or restore what was lost. It only creates new wounds, new dead, new families learning to live with holes that can never be filled. If this story made you think about justice, revenge, and the terrible price of honor, leave your like and share this video. Subscribe for more true stories that challenge everything we think we know about right and wrong. Comment below. Where do you draw the line? What would you have done in Marcus Grant's position? Because these stories aren't just history. They're happening right now, somewhere, in forgotten neighborhoods where systems have failed and desperation takes hold. Until next time, remember, monsters aren't always born. Sometimes they're made. One small disrespect, one stolen bracelet, one desperate decision at a time.